Hello, and welcome to the show.
Hello, and welcome to this week's episode of All Geeks Aside. This week I am bringing a character who is literally from the Hall of Fame. He's a legend in his own right, a character that is both powerful and compassionate all at the same time. His name is Petty Officer Master Chief John 117. He is from the Xbox game Halo, but he is so much more than that. He is now in movies, comic books, and everything in between. I remember playing it when I was a child. Well, not a child, younger. And it was great. Still to this day, I still turn on my Xbox, and Halo is one of the first games that I would pick up. So here's a character that I really wanted to cover and do him complete justice. Not only in his computer game iteration, but also in his comic book and movie franchises. They expand the story, show you more of him for who he is. So let me first preface the universe that we're in. In 2291, slipspace technology makes space colonization a reality. In 30 years, mankind established the inner colonies in the heart of the Milky Way, and soon into the outer periphery. In the year 2525, the human race meets an advanced alien alliance. This alliance called itself the Covenant. They decreed that humanity was an affront to their gods. This was the start of the Human Covenant War. Within a decade, the outer colonies were almost completely annihilated by the sheer power of the Covenant. In the face of direct attacks on the inner colonies by the Covenant forces, humanity's only hope depends on a special unit of genetically augmented soldiers. These soldiers were known as SPARTAN-IIs. Most notable among them was John 117. John was born in 2511, and he lived in Elysium on Eridanus II. As a child, he had brown hair, freckles, gap between his teeth, and he was almost a head taller than every other child. As a child, he would play games with the other kids, games like War, King of the Castle, but his mother told him that he wasn't to play with them, because he was too rough on them. In 2517, a Dr. Catherine Halsey went to visit him at his school on Eridanus III. You see, John had been chosen as a 150-strong preliminary pool for the Spartan-II program. When she met with him, she noticed that he had something special, so she approached him, and she asked to play a game with him. She showed him a coin, and she said, "Guess the side that it lands on. Win the game, keep the coin." 5 out of 5. He guessed each time correctly. So this proved to Dr. Halsey that not only was he a perfect specimen, but he also had luck. Later that year, Dr. Halsey conscripted John and the 74 children into the USNC as part of the Spartan-II program. But 75 children going missing would have brought awareness to all of this going on. So what did they do? Each child was replaced with a flash clone. The flash clone, while being perfect, would eventually fail. So this is why Dr. Halsey had to take the children and not use the flash clones instead. Dr. Halsey informed the children on their first day that they would be the protectors of the earth and all her colonies. The next morning, John awoke in his bunk to find he had dog tags with his new name, John 117. The children were under the tutelage of Chief Petty Officer Mendez. Early on in his career in the USNC, he did make friends. He made friends with a Kelly and Sam, who would be his lifelong friends. And he first learned the importance of teamwork when they were doing an obstacle course. They were told, last man across the line goes without food. So John leaps into action and ends up being first across the line, leaving his team in the dust. Every other team slowly came across the line, together, and when John's team finally came across, they were last. John was annoyed that he was first across the line, and yet his team lost, and they went without food. This was the lesson that John took, that without your team, you are nothing, and he kept that lesson with him for the rest of his career. Now, John was neither the smartest nor the fastest, or even the strongest, but he was the bravest. John proved himself to be worthy of leadership of the entire Spartan program when they were sent onto the planet Reach, which is a snow-filled planet and quite desolate. Each child was dropped out of a pelican and given a piece of the map of the planet, one of which had the extraction point. John told everyone a specific meeting point, and they all went there. Now they were told, last man onto the dropship walks home, and that's a long walk home. So John came up with a plan. He was going to get everyone off the planet. Nobody gets left behind. At their meeting point, they put the map together and devised a plan. While trekking the 2-day hike to get to the extraction point, they came across another dropship. It had USNC markings, but the people guarding it were not in uniform. And then they remembered the wolves. You see, one of their lessons was that a lone wolf can take down small animals, but when a pack of wolves strike a much larger animal, they can also take it down. So they devised a plan and captured the Pelican dropship, and every member of the Spartan-II program got home. As it turns out, this was not any ordinary UNSC. They were a group of special Marines who were not in uniform. When the whole team arrived back on a UNSC Pelican, Chief Mendez was visibly displeased with John for attacking these Marines. John told him he did not want to let anyone behind, that from now on none of his crew would get left behind. With that, Dr. Halsey promoted John to squad leader. Now other Spartans throughout this would end up being promoted, but John was still leader of all leaders. John would eventually become squad leader of Spartan II's blue team. But these are still ordinary children at this point. And at the age of 14, they went under the knife to have the dangerous Spartan II augmentation procedures done to them. Unfortunately, 30 children died, and 12 are left physically disabled. John was one of the 33 Spartans who survived the process. Now the rest who could still move were given desk jobs with the UNSC. This would forever be heavy on John's heart. After the memorial service for the fallen soldiers, John approaches Chief Mendez and says, "What could I have done? I lost my men." John is hurt by this. Now, as a result of their augmentation, they have heightened reflexes, increased strength, enhanced eyesight, and an unbreakable material was bonded to their bones. Now they have to recover from this. They have to learn how to walk again, move again. They're said to feel awkward in their own skin, so they are transferred to Atlas, which is a microgravity environment aboard a spacecraft. John decides to go to the gym to work out and burn off some steam. As he is just finishing his workout, 4 ODST soldiers, who at the time were the elite of the elite in the UNSC, walk in and bump into John, and he thinks nothing of it. And one of them decides to get under the bench that he was just working on and try to do his workout. And all the weights fall off, and they get angry. And they approach John. 2 of them grab him, and he counters, knocks 2 of them out, and then proceeds to beat them. While this is going on, Chief Mendez and Dr. Halsey are watching him, as if this was all a planned test. In 2525, John and his blue team are given their first mission. Their first mission is against the insurrectionists, who at the time were sabotaging and doing terror attacks against the UNSC throughout the entire colonies. In order to gain access to these insurrectionists, John and his team pose as the crew of the transport ship that is bringing supplies to an asteroid belt outside the Eridanus system. Their target? Colonel Robert Watts, originally from the UNSC, now turned insurrectionist. During their attack, John is wounded because he tried to save one of his teammates' lives from a bullet, but luckily they heal him with some biofoam, and they were able to complete the mission. As a result, there's 11 dead rebel soldiers, unknown dead civilians, but John receives a Purple Heart for his actions. Three months after this, the Spartans are briefed on the goings-on above the planet Harvest. The planet Harvest is a farming planet outside the outer colonies and provides food for many of the worlds. You see, this is where they first meet the Covenant. This was their first contact. all transmissions from the planet Harvest were lost, and the UNSC Commonwealth is sent to investigate. The USNC Commonwealth is also transporting John and the other Spartans to the Damascus testing facility. It is here where John gets his famous MJOLNIR Mark IV power assault armor, the green suit that he wears in the very first game. Upon arriving in orbit of Harvest, they notice that it is completely destroyed. There was nothing left. And then they are attacked by a Covenant vessel who jumps out of slipspace almost on top of them within the galaxy that they are in, the system that they are in. And the Captain Wallace stated that that's impossible, that no ship can do it. And Dr. Wolsey clearly states that no ship that we have can do that. The Commonwealth opens fire with nukes, Gauss guns, all sorts of weaponry to no avail, as all of the Covenant ships have shield technology. And then the Commonwealth opens its biggest can opener, their Mac gun. And the Mac gun is able to damage the hull, but not completely destroy it. Any other ship hit with this weapon would have completely destroyed it. So John and his blue team are tasked with taking out the Covenant ship internally. They board a Pelican and head towards it, not really knowing what they're going to do at this point. And then they realize that each Pelican has nukes, so they place the ship on autopilot, put on their helmets, strap a nuke to their back, grab their guns, and head out for the Covenant ship. Knowing that the ship needs to drop its shields in order to fire, they wait for the perfect time, and then boost in. Once on board the ship, using the breach that the Macron created, they slowly realize that there might not be just one species of alien in the Covenant, because no contact has been made at this time, except by one prophet. Following radiation signals, they find the ship's reactor of sorts and place their nuke. They take samples from all the bodies that they have killed, all the Covenant, and during this, one of Blue Team gets injured. Sam. He gets injured saving John's life this time. Now, I should let you know who the Covenant are, at least who some of the alien creatures that you meet. I know some of you may have played the game, so we'll just go through the 6 common species that are in the Covenant. But first, you've got the grunts, the ungoi, and they're the short, stout ones that usually have the small pistols. Then you have the jackals, the shield bearers, the snipers. They're the king yar. They're the kind of turkey buzzard looking ones. You've got the brutes. I'm going to butcher this one. It's Jiralhani. Kind of looks like a big yak. Usually has a heavy weapon. You have the elites, the ones that look like the predator. They're the Shangali. They usually have the laser sword or medium-sized weapons. Then you've got the hunters. The hunters have the big armor on. Looks like the Hulkbuster. And they're actually a small worm that's inside the suit. And they're called, I'm really going to butcher this one, Magalegalo. We'll go with that. Then you've got the drones, the flying creatures. They're Yanmis. Okay, so now I can continue on with this. Just in case the name comes up in my writing, I wanted you to know who they were. So Sam stays behind, and Kelly protests, saying that he's only staying to die. And John retorts, he's not staying to die, he's staying to fight. The rest of the team exit the ship, and Sam stays behind and goes down in a blaze of glory as the Covenant ship explodes and the mission is complete. A year later, in 2526, the Covenant attack again, this time a military science academy. The UNSC had suspected the safety of the planet for several days and sent Marines and ODSTs to safeguard it. The academy was all but destroyed as soon as the attack begun, but Blue Team was able to deploy undetected hours after this, and John fought to the Academy's ruins and protected the cadets, fighting off Covenant forces while waiting for evacuation. In 2544, John fights among some other Spartans while raiding the Third Fleet of the Glorious Consequence, because Dr. Halsey had been kidnapped, and they needed to free her because she is an important part of the UNSC and the Spartan program. As a result of the great importance of this mission, the UNSC used one of their stealth prowlers to transport the Spartans to infiltrate the Covenant fleet. They were given just 10 minutes to complete this mission. If they were not finished in 10 minutes, they were told that they would be obliterated with the rest of the Covenant fleet, using the new prototype Nova bomb. The team made their way towards the Covenant fleet on the booster frame fighters. Think space bikes with attitude. These bikes were fitted with everything from Gauss cannons, missiles, turrets, everything. 5 Spartans taking on an entire fleet. Using their onboard sensors to look for Dr. Halsey's signal from her cryosleep chamber, they discovered her on the very first ship. Solomon infiltrated the vessel, and realizing that it was a trap, and Kelly was trying to destroy some of the enemy forces that were attacking her, he tried to turn back. John voiced concern and went to rescue Kelly. Solomon was vaporized. John and Kelly survived. They proceeded to scan the rest of the vessels and discovered that the signal was coming from all of them. John deduced that she must be on the flagship, so they made their way there, meeting Covenant forces at every corner. Using every weapon they had aboard their booster frames, they made their way, only losing 2 more. 1 more. Kelly's bike had been damaged, and she had to evacuate her bike, leaping off and landing on Frederick's bike. They eventually made their way aboard the Covenant vessel, blowing up the blast doors and leaping in an epic fashion, using a bubble shield to protect themselves while they gathered themselves. As the dust cleared, they realized that they were completely surrounded by Covenant forces. They had but 3 minutes left. John and the other Spartans sprinted, taking out enemy at every turn. Eventually, they are met with 2 Shangali energy swordsmen, and Frederick decides to take both on with just his blades, allowing John and Kelly to continue on. But the commander of the ship is not having any of this. He starts jettisoning sections of the ship that they are in, killing his own men in the process. In the end, John and Kelly both have to jump to try and make it to the next doorway, as the section below them had just been jettisoned. Kelly is ahead of John, and as John leaps towards her, she reaches out her hand, grabs him, and using the inertia that she has built up, flings him forward, and he is able to reach the ship. It is then that he rescues Dr. Halsey. As they exit the ship and try and complete this rescue mission, John is encountered by another Shangali swordsman. John deflects his barrage of assaults with his rifle, and then he challenged him to a sword duel, using their energy swords. Eventually, Tell's commander, the Shangali commander, jettisons the lower part of the ship, causing John to almost be destroyed, and John and Dr. Halsey are now in a lower part of the ship, not in space, thankfully, but the cowardness of the Shangali major allowed John and Dr. Halsey to survive, and they proceed to commandeer a Covenant shuttle, which unfortunately is weaponless, and a formation of Covenant fighters known as Seraphs attacked them on their exit. As luck would have it, Fred and Kelly had also commandeered a ship, but their ship was armed, and they took out the Seraph fighters who were attacking John and Dr. Halsey. The death of John's teammates saddened him. The operation saw more Spartan-IIs killed in action than ever before, since the fall of Reach. John vowed to become stronger and never allow such a loss again. John served in over 200 campaigns against the Covenant Empire, over 27 years. By summer of 2552, John had received every medal awarded by the USNC except the Prisoner of War Medallion, since Covenant forces take no prisoners, and John would not allow himself or any other Spartan-II to be captured by the enemy. John would eventually receive a new power suit, MJOLNIR Mark V. This improved his strength and reaction even more than the Mark IV. He was also introduced to a new friend, an AI named Cortana, who is now the AI for Microsoft. The two would become friends, and in the first test of their partnership, the two were put through a practically suicidal test in an attempt by Colonel Akerson to get rid of John. Since John is a straight arrow, he decided not to cheat, and prove that he could do it himself. In the process, he is almost killed, but the teamwork of Cortana and John helped them pass the test, and this is the start of a great friendship. After the planet Reach came under attack by a massive Covenant armada, the majority of the Spartans, led by Fred 104, went to the planet's surface to protect the orbital defense generators, which powered the defense platforms in orbit. 3 Spartans were sent, John among them, to reach Station Gamma to destroy the unsecured nav database aboard the UNSC Circumference. If the Covenant had obtained this database, they would discover the location of every human in the world, including the planet Earth, and the location of Earth was still a closely guarded secret. They successfully destroyed the nav database. During this mission, James was killed and Linda was mortally wounded, both Spartan-IIs. John saved 4 other Marines, regular Marines, and the team returned to the UNSC Pillar of Autumn and were placed in cryosleep as the ship landed, then fled Reach. The ship jumped into slipspace in order to draw the Covenant forces away from planet Earth. Once the ship had arrived at its new destination, the crew realized that UNSC Halcyon and the Pillar of Autumn had been followed through slipspace by at least a dozen Covenant ships. Upon exiting slipspace, the Covenant forces opened fire on the Pillar of Autumn and sent boarding parties to take them out. Captain Keyes ordered John to be woken from his cryosleep and tasked him with ensuring the escape of Cortana while they crash-landed the Pillar of Autumn on an unidentified ring that was orbiting the planet. John escaped the Pillar of Autumn aboard a escape pod and rallied the Marines that he located on the ring's surface to take on the Covenant forces. Cortana learned that Captain Keyes had been captured and was being held prisoner in the Covenant ship Truth and Reconciliation. John joined the strike team that had been sent to rescue Captain Keyes. It is here that he learned that the rings were no ordinary rings. They were in fact a super weapon. The captain gave John new orders. He ordered him to locate the map room and pinpoint the location of the Halo's control center. On his way to the control center, he met with Fire Team Zulu and assisted them in securing the first and second chasms. In the beginning of all of this, the fight on board Halo was between the UNSC forces and the Covenant, but shortly thereafter, the Covenant forces had unwittingly released an ancient parasite known as the Flood, and the Flood proceeded to infect anything and anyone that they came in contact with. And now the saying, "the enemy of my enemy is my friend," joined the Covenant and the UNSC in eradicating the Flood. John 117 was sent to locate the activation key for the Halo, known as the Index. John was led to believe that this would destroy all the Flood on the planet's surface and on board the ring. But then Cortana revealed to him, by means of hacking into the Halo's mainframe, that this was not just to destroy the Flood. You see, the Flood need other life forms to survive since they are a parasite. What the Halo was designed to do was eradicate all sentient life in the galaxy, in the universe, in everything, in order to starve the Flood. John was then forced to disable the Halo's pulse generators in order to delay the plan that the Monitor had. Master Chief soon joined the three-sided combat between the Covenant, the Flood, and now the Forerunner Sentinels, who were on board the Halo as kind of antibodies in order to eradicate any Flood forces and, unfortunately, anyone who got in their way. Shortly thereafter, John tried to rescue Captain Keyes since he was still kidnapped and still on board the Covenant ship, but it was too late. The Flood had gotten to Captain Keyes and transformed him into a proto-gravemind. And what this is a form of the Flood parasite that is used for complex tasks like piloting ships, operating machinery, driving vehicles, what have you. And John manages to retrieve Captain Keyes' neural implant so that he is now able to activate the Pillar of Autumn's self-destruct. John then proceeds to the hangar of the Truth and Reconciliation and borrows a Banshee it's a Covenant fighter of sorts. And then John and Cortana barely make it back to the Pillars of Autumn, only to discover that the ship is now crawling with Flood and Covenant forces. After the self-destruct sequence was aborted on board the Pillar of Autumn, John manages to manually overload the fusion reactors, subsequently destroying the Pillar of Autumn and the installation on the planet below. To escape, John utilizes one of the Warthogs, which is kind of like a open-topped Humvee with a gun on the back, and he reaches the extraction point where the Pelican is due to pick him up. But as John approaches, he witnesses the Pelican being crashed into the Autumn's hull after being shot down by a pair of Banshees. John quickly enters the Pillar of Autumn's hangar bay, where he knows there is a prototype ship known as the Longsword. Utilizing this, he escapes the planet, along with some other UNSC soldiers that he saved along the way. After the destruction of the Halo, Cortana and John fled through space in the Longsword that they escaped in. On their travels, they discover 3 cryotubes floating nearby, one containing another Spartan. Soon after, a Covenant flagship known as Ascended Justice came into the system along with a few other cruisers, some of which had possibly escaped the Halo's destruction. Their flagship, the Threshold, a nearby Pelican dropship which was docked on an asteroid floating among the Halo debris field, fired at the cruiser to distract it. After a successful escape from the Covenant battle group, John linked the 2 vessels and brought the passengers aboard the Longsword. The crew of the Pelican helped John in capturing the Ascended Justice. The human survivors then traveled to Reach to look for surviving Spartans. John did eventually locate some fellow Spartans on Reach, along with Vice Admiral Danford Whitcomb and Dr. Halsey. They returned to the ship and linked with the UNSC frigate, UNSC Gettysburg. They had begun to travel to Earth and soon discovered a base belonging to the Eridanus rebels, led by Governor Jacob Giles. After receiving some repairs, Dr. Halsey surreptitiously leaves with another Spartan to an unknown location on Jacob Giles's personal ship. At the time, they were docked with the UNSC Gettysburg and Ascended Justice. The remaining UNSC forces were forced to abandon the rebels in the face of a Covenant assault and made their way towards the Covenant refit and repair station, because here an enormous fleet was poised to invade the Earth. Just before they jumped the slip space, Corporal Locklear inadvertently commits suicide while distorting the Forerunner crystal, which was recovered by Dr. Halsey from underneath the ruins of the castle base on the Halo. Dr. Halsey had given it to the Corporal shortly before she left on board Governor Giles' personal ship. She intended him to destroy it, for fear that it would fall into the hands of the Covenant. John faced a dilemma regarding the combat data on the Flood, which Dr. Halsey had given him, providing the standard data set to a Lieutenant Haverson. He hoped that this would save a Sergeant Johnson from possible experimentation by ONI, which is Office of Naval Intelligence. However, providing the complete data, which contained references to Sergeant Johnson's escape from the Flood due to his Boren syndrome, this would result in Johnson's death. Now, Boren syndrome was a fictitious syndrome made up by ONI in order to cover up the Project Spartan-I, since the military did not want them to know that they were experimenting on people at that time. John and the remaining Spartan-IIs focused on finding a way to stop the Covenant from reaching Earth, the location of which had still remained a guarded secret, but would soon be discovered. They destroyed the unyielding Hierophant, which was the refit and repair station that they had been at. The Spartan-IIs infiltrated the station. After spending 11 hours on board, they arrived at a temple, where a copy of the AI Cortana warned them of the guards that were stationed at the temple. Looking for sniping positions, the Spartan known as Linda and 4 other Spartans proceeded to enter the temple. They were ambushed by the Geralani brutes, and John was nearly killed, but the team did manage to take out their attackers. One of the Spartans was killed by 3 brute shots, and John activated the failsafe in his armor, denying her being taken by the Covenant, because he never wants any of his Spartans to be taken prisoner and tortured in the process. To destroy the refit and repair station, they decided to sabotage the generators, and they escaped through the side door. It was using the failsafe on Grace's armor that disintegrated the Covenant lances. John and 2 other Spartans quickly spotted 3 Banshees, but their Shengali pilots were killed by sniper fire from a Spartan in the distance. The Banshees were then captured by the Spartans, and John doubled back to retrieve the sniper, Linda. Shortly thereafter, they arrived back at the UNSC Gettysburg. Vice Admiral Whitcomb and Lieutenant Haverson piloted the Ascended Justice straight towards the retrofit station. During this time, Whitcomb discussed the Battle of the Alamo and the Battle of Thermopylae with the Spartans, with John, then prepared to fight the Covenant off, while the fusion reactors on the refit repair station detonated. Each of the 500 Covenant ships maneuvered next to the Ascended Justice. The Admiral and the Lieutenant were killed when the fusion reactor exploded, annihilating them, as well as 486 ships of the Covenant fleet. John left with Cortana, joined by 3 other Spartans. Where to next? They headed towards Cairo Station, where John received yet another upgrade, now the MJOLNIR Mark VI, and attended an award ceremony with the new Lieutenant Commander Miranda Keyes and Sergeant Major Johnson. But the ceremony was interrupted when a Covenant ship, known as the Fleet of Sacred Consecration, initiated the Battle of Earth. John successfully held the Covenant off the station, preventing them from boarding the ship. Upon discovering that the Covenant had, in fact, an antimatter charge already on board the Cairo, John fought his way through waves of Covenant forces until he reached the bomb. John was now in position to allow Cortana to access the bomb in order to deactivate it, by transferring her back into his suit from the station. Afterwards, she chose to stay with him, in despite of his offer for her to remain on the station. He would then use the antimatter charge against the Covenant by launching himself and the device off the station, using a decompression of one of the launch bays. But unfortunately, John had no way onto the Covenant ship. Luckily, a squadron of longswords launched an attack on the warship and breached its hull, thus allowing John to direct himself and the bomb into the ship's fusion core. Using the blast from the ship's core, he launched himself back onto the UNSC in Amberclad. John was then deployed to New Mombasa as the East African Protectorate aboard the UNSC in Amberclad. In an attempt to board Solomon Pennants, both of the strike team's Pelican dropships were shot down by a Scarab. John and the surviving Marines on his team found their way to the other Pelican's crash site. After rendezvousing with Gunnery Sergeant Marcus Staker at Hotel Zanzibar in Old Mombasa, John 117 destroyed many Covenant units along the shore as he chased the Scarab that attacked. Upon arriving at the edge of the town, John jumped into a Scorpion tank given to him by Sergeant Major Johnson. Fighting his way to the city centre, he found Marines under the command of Staff Sergeant Marcus Banks, who were pinned down by Covenant forces. With the assistance of the Marines and a large stockpile of weapons that he found, John boarded the Scarab and was able to destroy it from inside, taking out Covenant forces along the way. John was then transported to the UNSC in Amberclad to intercept the Prophet of Regret's flagship. But when the flagship started to enter slipspace, Lieutenant Commander Keyes granted permission to follow it. John and all aboard in Amberclad were then brought to the next Halo ring. Once there, John was deployed groundside in an SOEI-1V, which is a high-altitude dropship used to drop ODST soldiers onto surfaces below. And, as it happens, he was with ODST troops, which stands for Orbital Drop Shock Troopers. These are the elite of the elite, just under the Spartan-IIs. The team was tasked with locating and assassinating the Prophet of Regret. Cortana had told him that the Prophet of Regret intended on using the Halo as soon as possible. He tracked the Prophet to a temple in the middle of a lake, not before witnessing hundreds of Covenant vessels coming out of slipspace. He proceeded to take out the Prophet of Regret and escaped the temple shortly before it was destroyed by an overhead spacecraft. John jumped off the edge of the structure into the lake. On landing in the water, he lost consciousness and was unable to swim in the lake. He was captured by the flood's central intelligence, the Gravemind. Shortly thereafter, the Arbiter was also captured. The Gravemind appealed to the common interest that the flood and the humans shared, preventing the halos from being fired. John agreed to help, so the Gravemind tasked both captives with locating the halo index. This was required for the halo to be fired. He'd sent them to the most likely location that he knew of. John was sent to the space station High Charity, and at this point, the conflict between the Shingali, the elites, and the Giralani was beginning, leading the Covenant on a path of civil war, with John caught in the middle. After freeing some Marines that were imprisoned aboard High Charity, John proceeded to follow the hierarchs through the rest of the space station. At that time, the now flood-infested In-Amberclad made a slip-space jump into the city and crashed into a building below. The flood then used Pelican dropships from the In-Amberclad to spread the parasites throughout the space station. Despite the flood, Chief eventually caught up with the Prophets and their bodyguards. However, only the dying Prophet of Mercy, who had become infected by the flood parasites, was left to tell him that truth was heading to Earth. John faced another dilemma. The Covenant had the Index and could activate the Halo whenever they wanted, and Earth's defenses stood no chance against Truth's combined fleet. John decided to take care of Earth first, making it his main priority. Not wanting to risk detonating anything remotely, John was forced to leave Cortana behind, so that if Halo did become activated, she could detonate in Amberclad's reactors. John therefore boarded the Forerunner dreadnought, which was bound for Earth, but not before promising that he would return for Cortana after he stopped Truth. With John on board the Forerunner dreadnought, he was in many firefights, been captured, and escaped more than once. But John chose not to land on Earth on the dreadnought. No, he decided to jump out while it was still in space and fell through the Earth's atmosphere with no means of deceleration. John crash-landed on Earth, somewhere in East Africa, and he was found by Sergeant Johnson and the Arbiter. Johnson believed that John was dead and requested some heavy lifting gear to be brought in so they could move his body. However, John awoke, battle-ready, and showing an incredible tolerance for pain. Upon waking, he noticed that the Arbiter was there and immediately lunged for him to attack. Johnson then informed him that the Arbiter was now an ally of the Earth, and that the elites, as a whole, had defected from the Covenant. John and the Marines travelled through the jungle, searching for evacuations to a nearby military base. Johnson and his team split up from John and the Arbiter. The Sergeant and his squad were soon captured by some Covenant loyalists, although they were later rescued by John and the Arbiter. They would later be evacuated on a Pelican dropship to the UNSC base known as the Crow's Nest. But the base soon came under attack, but not before the Fleet Admiral Terence Hood told John his plan. Lieutenant Commander Keyes decided to evacuate the base, most of which were wounded soldiers. John, the Arbiter, and the remaining UNSC Marines decided that they would defend the base while the evacuations took place. Their mission was to plant a bomb in the base, destroying it along with the invading Covenant. John 117 was attacked by many brutes, and his only means of escape was an elevator, saving himself from the blast. He found himself underground. While there, he met up with some surviving Marines, and they escaped the base and headed for the city of Voi, which was an industrial city near Kenya. Along the highway to Voi, John pushed through many loyalist forces as he made his way there, since they believed that there was an arc, which was a Forerunner piece of equipment that linked all of the Halo rings and could activate them all at once. But it turned out that the device was not an arc. It was in fact a device that opened a portal to the arc. John, with the support of Marines that were helping him along the way, took out 3 anti-air rates, a scarab, and some anti-aircraft cannons. Thus, allowing the UNSC Forward Unto Dawn and the remaining frigates, Aegis and Faith, to fire upon the Truth's dreadnought ship, though it did have little to no effect on it. Truth then activated the Ark and fled through the wormhole that it had opened with his remaining loyalist forces. The UNSC, however, did not willy-nilly jump through this Ark. They waited, came up with a plan. With the battle seemingly over, for now, a surprise was in store for the UNSC. A flood-infested Covenant ship crash-landed in Voy. John and the Arbiter, along with the remaining Marines, fought and contained the flood, learning that the only way to contain the flood was in fact to destroy the warship that they were coming from. Luckily, the Covenant ship Shadow of Intent and its combined elite fleet came to the aid of the UNSC. The Sangali fleet deployed special operations strike teams, thus assisting John and the Arbiter as he was sent to retrieve Cortana from the cruiser, as it was believed that she was on board. John retrieved the damaged data device and was brought aboard the Shangali flagship, Shadow of Intent. Unfortunately, the data turned out to only be a message, rather than Cortana herself. The Shangali were able to stop the flood infestation by glassing the city. Glassing is complete annihilation of the city through spatial bombardment. The Shangali and the UNSC watched Cortana's recording, which contained a warning that High Charity, the space station, was now overwhelmed and controlled by the Gravemind, and was headed for Earth. However, she offered some little hope, with information of a way to stop the halos from firing and neutralizing the flood threat. Convinced of the reliability of this message, John resolved to journey to the Ark, while Hood mobilized the remaining forces on Earth. But John would not go alone. He was accompanied by UNSC Marines and Sangahili Task Force specialists. They boarded the UNSC Forward Unto Dawn and headed through the Ark. The Sanghili carried UNSC forces through the slipspace portal, which led to the Ark. The team was determined to stop Truth from activating the remaining 6 halos. They descended in Pelicans, while the Sanghili fleet fought hard against the brute ships. They flew to the surface of the Ark to eliminate the Covenant in the area, to secure a landing zone for the UNSC Forward Unto Dawn, and to find the Ark's cartographer, which was basically a map room that gave a 3D representation of the entire facility. Upon locating the cartographer, they learned that Truth was in the installation's citadel. John, the Arbiter, and a squad of Marines were assigned separately to attack 3 towers that, while they were activated, projected a shield around the citadel. John and the Arbiter completed their mission. However, Sergeant Johnson was captured in battle, but he was spared in order to serve as a Reclaimer. A Reclaimer is an individual who has been chosen to activate the Halo Ring. They can also activate Forerunner technology, and only humans and Forerunners can become Reclaimers. John, the Arbiter, and the Sanghili forces deactivated the last tower, lowering the shield, just as the Shadow of Intent was about to destroy the Citadel. The flood-controlled High Charity exited slipspace, bringing the flood into battle. It destroyed the Shadow of Intent with a large flood biomass, which is kind of like a big mess of flood spores. They're not really pupated yet. After defeating the last remnants of the Loyalist forces, including 2 Scarabs, John and the Arbiter proceeded to enter the Citadel. It is now that Truth forced Johnson to begin the activation sequence. But, in an unexpected turn of events, John and the Arbiter made a temporary alliance with the Flood to stop the activation of the rings. The final Loyalist defences were crushed by the Flood as John and the Arbiter reached Truth, who unfortunately now was also infected by the Flood. But the Arbiter made short work of him with his laser sword, while John deactivated the rings. But the Flood Gravemind betrayed them, laughing as he succeeded in preventing his own destruction. Fighting wave after wave of flood, John and the Arbiter finally escaped. As they were leaving the Citadel, John saw a vision of Cortana that led him and the Arbiter to the exit. There he learned of her plan. A replacement for the 4th Halo had been built by the Ark, and it was not yet connected to the rest of the array. Since the Halo was far from an inhabited galaxy, John decided to activate the ring and destroy the Gravemind, but first headed to the remains of High Charity. While there, John battled horde after horde of Flood, being taunted by images of Cortana falling into rampancy, by threats from the Gravemind. He finally reached Cortana, who still had the activation index from the 4th installation. John then destroyed the city by overloading its generators. On his way out, Cortana detected a friendly contact, which turned out to be the Arbiter. High Charity exploded, and the three narrowly escaped on a UNSC Pelican. After the Singhali victory over the Covenant Loyalists, the Shadow of Intent along with the UNSC forces left the Ark for Earth, leaving the Chief, Cortana, the Arbiter, and Johnson to finish the fight. Their final task was to activate the Halo ring that they were on. They headed to the surface of the Halo, and they found the Gravemind was trying to put himself back together. But they were attacked by combat Flood, who were bigger, larger Flood spores, and attacked both John and the Arbiter, forcing them to fight their way up to the control room, where they could deactivate the Halo ring. During the battle, Sergeant Johnson arrived and assisted John in his fight. After defeating all Flood forces around the control room, 343 Guilty Spark, which was a Forerunner monitor tasked with overseeing the installation, unlocked the control room doors. Once inside, however, Guilty Spark realized that the team intended to fire the Halo before it could be completed, which, as it happens, would also destroy the Halo ring itself. Guilty Spark fired on Sergeant Johnson and then turned on Master Chief. As he does so, Guilty Spark portrays, "You are the child of my maker, inheritor of all they left behind. You are Forerunner, but this ring is mine." John stood his ground, even after being hit by several energy blasts. He fought hard against Guilty Spark. Although the monitor seemed to be indestructible, Johnson shot the monitor, distracting him for a moment. He then handed Master Chief his Spartan laser, and John completely annihilated Guilty Spark. Unfortunately, Johnson's injuries were fatal, and he requested that John send him out with a bang. After handing over Cortana's data chip and imploring him, "Don't ever let her go," Cortana activated the Halo ring, and the Arbiter and John fled to the Forward unto Dawn, fighting the remaining Flood and the Halo Sentinels along the way. They escaped the firing and destruction of the Halo. However, the slipspace portal that they had created was being acted on by the shockwave from the Halo ring blast, and was not able to sustain itself under all this stress, and its closure severed the ship Forward unto Dawn in half, sending the Arbiter to Earth, but sending John and Cortana drifting in space. With the Arbiter safely on Earth, John and Cortana were presumed dead. A memorial near Mount Kilimanjaro in Africa was erected in honor of the UNSC servicemen that lost their lives during the Battle of Earth. As there were no pictures to remember John by, his Spartan ID number 117, along with the Master Chief, Petty Officer of the Navy insignia patch, were taped next to his ID number. But John and Cortana had survived. They were now stranded in space, aboard the cargo portion of the Forward unto Dawn, but it was nearly powerless, and without airlocks or a bridge, so they could not properly navigate. Cortana was happy that John had survived, explaining to John that it could take years before anyone could discover their distress signal. Cortana listed what John did, and told him, "It's finished," and this time John agreed with her. To this John agreed, and proceeded to place himself into a cryostasis tube, at which point Cortana said, "I'll miss you." John replied, "Wake me when you need me," and went into cryosleep. In 2556, while still stranded in space, Cortana attempted to talk to John while he was still asleep. Unable to get a response from him, she recounted the history of the galaxy, seemingly unaware that John could not hear her, showing major signs that she was descending into rampancy. Now, rampancy is a terminal state of being for artificial intelligent constructs, in which the AI develops delusions of godlike powers, as well as utter contempt for its mentally inferior makers. How long had this taken? How long was she alone? In the words of Cortana, "We've been floating endlessly in space for 1,651 days, 6 hours and 19 minutes. That means over 4 years aboard this ship with nothing to do. No tasks to complete. For over 4 years, all I have done is think. The Forward Unto Dawn arrives at a Forerunner shield world named Requiem. Now the shield worlds were a military base and research facility set up by the Forerunners hundreds of thousands of years ago. Cortana wakes John from cryosleep when they are being scanned by Requiem. Shortly after this, the Forward Unto Dawn is boarded by Covenant forces seeking to deny them access to this planet below. But the Requiem's defense systems shoot down the Covenant ship and opens up and draws both the Forward Unto Dawn and the entire Covenant fleet into the shield world. John would once again perform a miracle by surviving the crash onto the planet's surface below. And it is here that Cortana reveals to him that she is slowly descending into rampancy and going insane. But John is completely loyal to Cortana, completely loyal to everyone that he respects and loves, and he promises her that he will get her back to Earth and get Dr. Halsey to fix her. However, Cortana states that there is no coming back from this, but John must press on. He navigates his way through the wreckage, and while doing so, he finds a transmission of the UNSC Infinity, but it is very faint. Cortana tells him that he needs to hijack one of the Covenant ships to get closer to the Forerunner facility, and the Infinity signal might clear up enough to hear a word. Once at the facility, they find the local cartographer, revealing to them that they are on Requiem, and John asks Cortana to find out what the Covenant is searching for, but the console locks up. They reactivated the cartographer. After doing so, the transmission from the Infinity is picked up once again, this time much clearer, and Cortana attempts to contact the ship, but to no avail. She then suggests that John use the cartographer to find where the Infinity is on Requiem, but the cartographer initially says no, although it soon points John to the Requiem's core, which he doubts is correct. Cortana states that the planet is hollow, and that somebody could have gotten deeper into Requiem than they did. Afterwards, she suggests to him to take a portal to the core from a terminus on the far side of the complex. John fights his way to this terminus, which is located atop of a tower. Once there, Cortana attempts to open a portal to the point of the Infinity's transmission. When she tries to do so, the system responds with a Forerunner symbol for Reclaimer. She tries once again. However, when the portal opens, a large number of Promethean knights, who are a mechanical Forerunner warrior, kind of like small Gundams, spawn in front of them, but hesitate to engage in combat. Then John jumps through the portal, evading all of the Promethean knights. The portal takes him somewhere near the core, close to the console. There is a satellite at the center of the core and it is amplifying the Infinity's transmission, but two beams coming from it are interfering with the satellite. Cortana then opens another portal to get closer to the first pylon. It is here that John encounters more Prometheans. He fights through them and takes down the pylon, which clears up the signal even more. Upon returning to the console, several Covenant ships exit slipspace at the core and start heading towards the second pylon. John then portals near this point, fighting all the way and disabling the second pylon, making the transmission even clearer. John is then contacted by the Infinity's captain, who picked up John's signal, and Cortana attempts to warn the Infinity not to enter Requiem, but the signal received by Captain Del Rio is faint. Thus, the ship is ordered to move even faster, putting his crew and his ship in terrible danger. John is advised to head to the satellite quickly by Cortana. In doing so, he finds that the Covenant and the Prometheans are now in a firefight against each other. He makes his way through them, and upon reaching the satellite, Cortana tells John to touch two pillars that have the symbol of the Reclaimer on them. This is so that he can contact the Infinity and warn its captain. So John, being the loyal soldier that he is, does so. But this is no satellite. The machine is actually a prison of sorts, a cryptum. And in this cryptum is an ancient Forerunner named Didax. Sorry, it's been a while since I played this game, and I'm not sure how to pronounce some of these crazy names. And it was a Reclaimer that needed to release him, and John had been a reclaimer since the very first Halo ring that he had been on. With the Forerunner Didact let out from his spherical cell after 100,000 years of imprisonment, he states that humans were not fit to uphold the mantle, and he calls the Librarians, who are the life shapers of the Forerunners. And I must say that Didact was a Forerunner Promethean who was a warrior servant caste, and was in fact married to the Librarian. And the reason that Didact was imprisoned was that he used a special weapon on humans to encase them into Promethean knights. And the reason he calls the Librarians meddlesome is her attempt to protect the humans, and he waves his hand and gains control of all Prometheans present, turning their lights from orange into blue. He dismisses John and Cortana's presence in such a way that he actually throws John far across the surface, crashing into a wall, rendering him less of a threat now. John is trying to recover from such impact, such coming from a man who can withstand falling from space, getting blown up with one blow from a Forerunner Promethean, and he's knocked out. And unfortunately he is left unconscious. Didact escapes and jumps into slipspace, but the process of jumping into slipspace disables the core. John awakens and escapes the planet's core by means of a Covenant ghost, using it to jump back to the surface just in time to watch the Infinity crash and the Didact following to scan it. In pursuit of Didact, John fights countless numbers of Prometheans in the jungles of Requiem, eventually encountering Commander Lasky and Commander Palmer, as well as several Spartan IVs and countless Marines. More Prometheans portal in. John eventually discovers several knights commanding Covenant forces. After extracting via Pelican, John joins the forces with his successors as they fight their way to the Infinity in a Scorpion tank. Once there, Captain Del Rio orders him to take a Mantis, which is a 9-foot-tall, 5-ton badass Gundam fitted with a machine gun and surface-to-air missiles. But its actual name is a little less fancy, not Mantis. Its actual name is the Yggdrasil Mark IX armor. Using this, he is to deal with Didact's cryptum outside the ship. Dealing blows with dozens of Prometheans and Covenant soldiers, John makes his way to the outer hull of the ship. He fights off wave after wave of Banshees and Phantoms. But to take out the rest of the Covenant forces, he uses the Infinity's Mach gun. He then rendezvous with Del Rio, John, and Cortana try to convince the captain of how much of a threat the Didact really is, only for their efforts to be in vain, as Del Rio is more concerned with having the Infinity escape and send a report to FleetCom. Trying to get his point across about Didact's vulnerability, Del Rio retorts with a veiled insult about John being the final Spartan-II before the bridge. After this, John is deployed with Gypsy Company to destroy the gravity well, keeping the Infinity inside the planet. John hitches a ride with a Mammoth, which is an M510 heavy armored troop transporter, and he works his way down a canyon-like path, using a target locator to destroy a particle cannon along the way. They enter a Forerunner structure in the hopes of disabling a certain restraining piece of technology, but are instead lured into what appeared to be a shaft of a blue light after Cortana goes missing. It is here that he encounters the preserved consciousness of the Librarian, held within Requiem's system, and is told of Didact's true plan and the device known as the Composer that he intended to use against humanity. The Librarian tells John a very quick synopsis of the history of the humans and Forerunners, and of the Forerunner Flood War. In order to combat the Didacts effectively, the Librarian advanced the evolutionary process to render John immune to the effects of the weapon, and she releases him to fend off the Didact. John destroys the gravity well and returns to the Infinity, where he again tries to convince Captain Del Rio of the true threat that the Forerunner Didact posed, but still he refused to believe it. Cortana proceeded to become angry and have a fit of rampancy, surprising the captain and the crew present. Del Rio ordered that Cortana be decommissioned because of this, only to have John take her chip away before anyone else could. But Del Rio wants the chip. He orders John to hand it over, and John refused. This angered the captain even more, and ordered that John be arrested at the hand of Palmer. John gave a final warning of the didact and left the bridge. Lasky, who believed everything that John had said, circumvented the orders that he was given and gave John a pelican to escape the ship to help in his efforts to take down didact. John left the Infinity and went to disable the two towers that were generating a shield around him, later attempting to use the control tower to trap him inside Requiem. When this failed due to Cortana's worsening condition, John decided to hitch a ride aboard didact's ship. Leaping from tower to tower, the Spartan skydived down to one. The didact scriptum fused with the Forerunner ship, Mantle's approach. This, along with multiple others, proceeded to enter slipspace. They were after the Composer to use against humanity, but also this portal led to the third Halo ring. John was traveling through slipspace, hiding under a piece of the Covenant ship. Arriving at the third Halo installation, John 117 disembarked his hiding place aboard the ship. It was here that the UNSC research facility was attacked by the forces from Requiem. John 117 managed to enter the Leech ship. He incapacitated the Covenant crew aboard and took control of the bridge. He proceeded to send a broadcast to the research facility warning them of the impending attack, ordering them to evacuate immediately. But in the middle of the message, Cortana's rampancy took control, and John's broadcast was cut short. She ignored his commands to stop the ship from crashing into the station below, and continued to ramble, causing it to crash into the research facility. John awoke in the remains of the crash. He regained communication with the station scientist, Dr. Tilson, and recommended they evacuate immediately. Master Chief was then told that the Covenant had taken control of all of the landing bays. He recommended that she begin evacuation preparations while he went and dealt with that. He fought his way through the whole station, defeating multiple Covenant squadrons, until he eventually cleared one evacuation point. From there he made his way to Dr. Tilson to explain the whole situation, to explain of the didact's yearning for the Composer that was hidden on this station. She told him that the Composer was far too large to move, that nothing less than the biggest starship the UNSC had could move it. The Spartan then asked Dr. Tilson to give Cortana access to the manifest of the station. She proceeded to search for any weapon that was on board that could destroy the Composer. What she found was a nuclear warhead on the station. Master Chief decided that this was the only way to stop didact from getting the Composer. Tilson was not happy with this. Using a nuclear weapon against a UNSC facility was not something that she was used to. She had dedicated her entire life to researching the Composer. However, she still gave Master Chief her word that she would make sure the warhead was primed and ready for remote detonation. John apologized and asked Dr. Tilson to once again continue the evacuations. But when the first evacuation was shot down by the Covenant, Cortana realized that she might be able to reprogram the station's defense system to provide cover fire for the evacuation. On the way to the control center, Cortana continued to grow worse. Her rampant outbursts were getting uncontrollable now. Tilson's team rigged the warhead for remote detonation, and Cortana programmed the defenses, successfully making them target only the Covenant who were attacking. Master Chief went and rendezvoused with Dr. Tilson, but this was hindered by the location of the Composer being compromised by Covenant forces. Master Chief defeated all enemies and once again moved on. He told Dr. Tilson that, ready or not, he needed the weapon right now. On the next broadcast to her, he received no response, so he went to where she was located at the cargo bay, hopefully to find the nuke wrapped in a bow and ready to go. An immense energy wave hit the elevator in mid-transport, completely stopping it. It was didact's ship, the Mantle approach, as it pulled the Composer away from the station with ease. At this point, John tried to focus on the now rampant Cortana to find Dr. Tilson's location. Cortana searched through Dr. Tilson's career files, figuring out that she was a student of archaeology. And then Cortana found her on another deck in the station and confirmed her biosignature was stable, and she was okay. John went and found Dr. Tilson in a large crowd of distressed scientists, huddling in fear John told her that Didac stole the composer, and he intended to insert Cortana into the system and ask to check the flight catalog for anything that can carry a payload. Just then, something happened outside. Didac was charging a weapon of some sorts. John asked Cortana to activate the station's defenses once again, but they did not respond this time. Cortana continued to search through the flight catalog to find a ship that could carry some weapon. Unable to help, Cortana watched as the composer composed every member of the science team all at once. But, since John was now immune to this, he was merely knocked unconscious. An unspecific amount of time then passed, and John awoke and saw Cortana, in distress, sitting at a console. She asked him if he was okay, and crying. She could hear what was left of the scientists after monitoring the data pulse. John, clearly in an attempt to avoid an emotional conversation, stoically stated that he needed to move. He needed to get out of here. Cortana sadly said that the scientists were gone, to which John dutifully added that more would follow if the Didac reached Earth. Cortana returned to dwell on her ensuing rampancy, and how the UNSC would pair John with another AI, possibly another Cortana model, if Halsey let them. He told her that he wouldn't let that happen, ignoring his stubborn optimism, and desperately informed him that the new AI wouldn't be her. John found a broadsword, a somewhat multi-role strike fighter in the hangar, and Master Chief and Cortana knew whatever the librarian did to John worked. John proceeded to have the broadsword armed with a nuclear warhead and headed off to take on Didac. Cortana ran through the plan with John. He was to board the ship and find the bridge before Didac slipped into slipspace one more time. She warned him that the broadsword's shields were not rated for slipspace, but John replied that the Didacs were, and he was going to take refuge inside the enemy's shielding. So John accelerated to attack speed and hid in the enemy's shielding, flying close to the outer hull of the Mantle's approach, towards the composer, dodging pieces of the ship as they moved and activated to defend against him and try and destroy him. During this time, the Didac broadcast signals expressing his surprise and dismay at how John wasn't composed, and that such an inoculation should not have been possible. Cortana then figured out that Didac was with the composer, and that they could destroy both of them at the same time. John continued to hug the outer hull. Cortana told him that they were coming out of slipspace. Communications of Earth were being warned of the fleet's detection of an unknown ship. John tried to contact Captain Del Rio on the Infinity, but he didn't pick up. Thomas Lasky, however, did. John questioned as to where the captain was. Lasky told him that Fleetcom wasn't happy with how Del Rio abandoned the chief on Requiem, and that he would have to do. John told him of Didac's intentions, and that he and Cortana were in a broadsword carrying a Havoc payload, which is basically a 30 megaton nuke, with the intention of destroying the composer. Lasky had the orbiting fleet engage the Didac and the compressor. The Spartan managed to fight through the remainder of the outer hull and located the composer and the Didac. Attempting to gain access to the composer, Master Chief was cut off from an opening to it. John radioed this to Lasky, to which he recommended deactivating the shields so Infinity could make another opening for him. John destroyed the shield generators, giving the Infinity a chance to use its Mac cannon to shear a path into Didac's ship, giving John the entrance he needed. John was now inside. The Didac did everything he could to stop him, closing pathways on top of the broadsword as it flew in. John expertly flew, and though the compressing pathway kept shrinking and shrinking to a narrow strip of white light, and the broadsword crashed. But John being John, he stepped away from this also. Cortana queried John as to what he would do next. He grabbed the nuke and magnetically locked it to his armor, calling this Plan B. He then fought his way through wave after wave of Promethean soldier leading up to Didac. Eventually the pair reached the central control area. The central control area more specifically for the composer. The chief then used a gravity lift to fling himself across a void, reaching the lower floors of the control center. John accessed the terminal and allowed Cortana access to deactivate the shield. Cortana told him to insert her into a few terminals around the composer so that she may deactivate the shields around it. After fighting his way to the first generator, Cortana revealed that she's going to do something that was not going to like. It is then that her holographic form split into multiple copies as she ejected her rampant personality spikes into the system. This overwhelmed it and disabled the shields under the stress of the sheer amount of multiplying rampant copies. She continued to repeat this process, and John moved in to engage Didac, who declared that John had failed, and he fired the composer on Earth, composing the population of New Phoenix. John went to retrieve Cortana, but the Didac disintegrated the terminal, throwing John backwards in the process. Promethean Knights attacked, and as they did, John saw out of the corner of his eye a message from Cortana, showing that she was still alive, and she was now within the system of the mantle approach. And now he began to hear many strange voices from the rampant personality spikes of Cortana, proclaiming her intent was always to take care of him. John looked around for a means to follow the Didac. He located a gravity lift, and he used this to go up to find the light bridge that connected directly to the composer. Below and all around it was an abyss of energy. He caught sight of the Didac with his orange aura above the composer, but then he vanished. He challenged John while in his camouflaged state. John turned. The Didac was behind him and attempted to engage him in battle. John was then thrown by the Forerunner enemy, knocking the warhead away from his back as he slid across the light bridge, and his battle rifle fell into the abyss below. John regained his footing, and he was caught between two options: charge the Didac or retrieve the weapon. He chose the latter. Running for the warhead, he stopped when the Didac engaged him and lifted him high above the slipspace portal below. He claimed that John had been misguided, and that the humanity's imprisonment within the composer was nothing but a kindness. The Didac began to close his fist, crushing John between his fingers. This must have been extreme pain, because John finally started to groan. But just then, just as he was about to drop John into the abyss below, a familiar face surrounded the Didac. It was Cortana and her rampant personality spikes who emerged from the light bridge. They confronted the Didac and bound him to the bridge, stopping him from attacking John or activating the composer once again. Under the pressure of the hard light forms of Cortana, the Didac dropped John, and he crashed chest first onto the bridge, barely able to grab the ledge as he almost slipped into the swirling orange abyss beneath him. He struggled to the bridge and swiftly charged the Didac, forcing a pulse grenade into his armor. This did not stop him. He broke free from Cortana's bonds and pushed him away, sending him sliding across the bridge once again. He freed his other arm. The Didac began to slowly lift John up into the air. John exerting sounds of desperation and pain, preparing for his almost imminent demise. The grenade detonated, causing the Didac to lose focus and becoming injured in the process. He dropped John, and he stumbled off the bridge, falling into the abyss, the slipspace below. But John was out of time. He painfully crawled towards the warhead on all fours, crashing into everything around him. He was prepared to make the ultimate sacrifice. He looked in the distance at the earth below, yelling in pure defiance and anger. He smashed his hand into the tip of the warhead and detonated the nuclear weapon. And then there was nothing. He awoke in a strange place, surrounded in what looked like holograms, hard light. He called for his friend. He called for Cortana, but got no reply. Looking around, he saw nothing, and then a blue light drew his attention. A now fully sized human Cortana stepped out of a coding circle and approached him. John asked her how to leave, but Cortana said she wouldn't be coming with him this time. John said stubbornly that they had to go together, and his voice was visibly trembling. He said, "I'm not leaving here without you." Cortana sadly said his name before resting her hand on his armor for the first and last time. Sighing, she revealed to him that she had always longed to touch him, but the chief reminded Cortana that it was his job to protect her. However, she told him that it was their job to look after each other, and that they had done so. Touching John one last time, she began to walk away. He begged her to wait. She disappeared into a data circle once again, and John was left devastated. His friend was gone. The aura around her flickered and faded, leaving nothing but the debris of the mantle's approach around him. John was now in space, drifting aimlessly once again. A USNC Pelican came and rescued him, taking him to the Affinity, where he was greeted by the crew. He went to meet Commander Lasky on the observation desk of the Infinity. Now John was alone, and he felt soldiers and people were two different things, and Lasky informed him that they're not. Suddenly, John came to realize something about him that he had never thought before. He was brought up as a killing machine, and distanced himself from humans, and he now saw that he distanced himself from almost every other person he had ever known. He remembered what Cortana had asked him earlier, about who out of the pair of them was the real machine, and it came to him. The answer was him. John entered the Spartan-IV training deck aboard the USNC Infinity, to the amazement of all the trainees around him, and he stepped up to the armor removal station, where a team of scientists removed his armor, while the other Spartan-IVs and personnel present looked on with great respect and admiration for him. On July 25, 2557, John was debriefed before HICOM of his clashes with the Didact and his encounter with the Librarian. Since the Didact's death was not confirmed, General Hogan decided to cover up New Phoenix's attack as being perpetrated by a rogue section of the Covenant. When the debriefing was over, Lord Hood spoke with John, apologizing for the lack of professionalism during the debriefing. He then requested the Chief's help in advising a team and showed him audio logs from a science team on the Halo Installation 3, escorted by Spartan Team Black. They were attacked by creatures John believed to be Prometheans. John requested that his team join the rescue effort on Halo 3. Hood wasn't sure. John firmly told him that the Prometheans should be confined to the Requiem, and it is best that he see them if they are running wild. Soon John would be joined by old friends. Soon John was back with Blue Team, composed of Frederick 104, Kelly 87, and Linda 58, who were surprised to see him. They arrived on Halo Installation 3 the next day. Arriving at Team Black's last known coordinates, they found Promethean crawler footprints on the ground. But when they finally reached the science camp, they found all scientists dead and Team Black killed in action. John then suspected that something more powerful than crawlers did this. Blue Team were then ambushed by Promethean Knights, but they took care of them with little ease. The Spartans then retraced the crawler's tracks back to the hole where the Composer was uncovered, and they entered the tunnel to find the Composer's abyss. It is here where they find that the true adversary was in fact the Didact, that he had survived, and he had returned once more. John once again stood his ground. This time, John took his eye with his knife, but the Didact crushed his head. Fearing that John was dead, Blue Team opened fire. The Didact was forced to cast John aside. It would take 4 Spartans to take out the Didact once and for all. Shortly after this, they took care of the Composer's abyss, which was in fact an underground chamber where all the victims of the Composer were digitized and stored, and left no choice but to destroy it. John was ordered then to break all military operations with Blue Team. Instead of taking the order, John led Blue Team on countless more military missions when he saw fit. Only began to speculate on John's mental condition. This was furthered in 2558, when an ambassador for the outer colonies was scheduled for peace talks between the human and alien delegates. But just as the peace talks were coming to a close, John apparently attacked the embassy where the event was being held and killed 19 human security guards. The alien delegates were escorted away by John to safety, and John also abducted the ambassador, whose dead body was found in a field the next day. It was later revealed that Blue Team and the Chief had learned of a plot against the ambassador, promoting their arrival at the delegation. Master Chief escorted the Sengali delegates to safety, along with the mortally wounded ambassador. The Chief killed 9 Sapien Sunrise, a xenophobic activist group who almost acted like terrorists, but unfortunately 10 of the ambassador's security detail were killed in the process, not by John, along with 3 Sengali guards. By the time the investigators realized that the attack was a work of the Sapien Sunrise, a leak had revealed false information regarding the event, causing outcry against the Master Chief and the Spartan-II program in general. One of the last missions John would participate in was a UNSC raid of the UNSC Argent Moon. It is this where John went missing and considered AWOL. As a result of John's disappearance, Oni deployed Fire Team Osiris to hunt down the Spartan, to no avail. On October 27, 2558, the UNSC publicly declared Petty Officer Master Chief John 117 officially dead. Unofficially, however, he is still alive, and still being hunted by Fire Team Osiris. May they never find him. And that's it. that is John 117's story. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. If you would like to request a character, you can do so on my social media. I am on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook, and it is at allgeeksaside on all platforms. There will be links below in the show notes. Also, if you would like to help support the show in any little way possible, I have a TeePublic store. And what that is a t-shirt company who has many, many great artists who design their own t-shirts, and I have curated some from characters that I've covered in my podcast and added them to my store. If you would like to purchase one there, you can do so, and a little bit will come back to me. And also there is t-shirts with my logo on there, and if you check out my social media, you will see my new logo on there also. Also, there's 2 podcasts that I would like to recommend to my listeners or anyone who did listen. The first one is called When Diplomacy Fails, and this is a weekly podcast that covers the build-up to, breakout of, and the consequences of various conflicts in history. And this week, he does a crash course on the Cold War. Now, I haven't had a chance to listen to this week's episode yet, but I have listened to the previous day's episode, and it's fantastic. I can't recommend it enough to anyone who likes history, and I would gladly tell all my friends who do listen to the podcast to go ahead and listen to that. And the second one kind of intrigued me, since I don't actually like true crime podcasts, but this one is a little bit different. It's a podcast called Red Handed, and it's a podcast that jumps headfirst into all manners of the macabre madness. They cover everything from big-time serial killers, and even those that you may not have heard of, to hauntings, possessions, disturbing mysteries, and basically anything in between. Last week's episode was Madness, Murder, and Munchausen's by Proxy, the case of Gypsy Rose Blanchard. And it was, just go listen, it's creepy. But anyway, they're my recommendations for 2 podcasts this week. I'm going to try and do 2 different podcasts each week. Thanks for listening. See you next time.